police, and it's to do with using the phone for electioneering. Yes. And I had a discussion with one of the councillors about that very issue, and it was quite clear to me that the phone wasn't being used or was not intended to be used for electioneering, because the method of electioneering was door knocking. But we get into there's an area around subtleties where you can't, it's grey.
So will elected members be reminded that they're expected to use their own phone, and you can't say, oh, I can't possibly use two phones, is not an excuse for using council resources? I think just a reminder, I think that's really important.
Yes, that's in the policy, and we'll promulgate the policy to all elected members once it's been adopted.
Thank you.
We've got Councillor Dick and Councillor Cam, and then Councillor Christine.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. And Warwick, Councillor Cooper has raised an interesting issue, because I would have thought that, especially during the election period, and a local board member or any other elected member, if they're criticising policy or criticising anybody else, they should be very cautious in regards to signing themselves as, you know, the member for Howick or a local board member for Waitakere or whatever. I would imagine there'd be you would want to caution people around just how they framed any communication, and then added their elected title to that communication.
There's a general rule in the Code of Conduct, and so this is assuming that they're not using council resources to do that, but say the media, that a member is permitted to present their own view, provided they make it very clear it's a personal view and they're not using their title to represent, that they are making it on behalf of a body.
Yep. Right, Councillor Cam.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Warwick, it's good that point 24, use of mayoral resources, quote, council resources provided for mayoral use should not be used for any electioneering activities associated with any candidate, and I think that clearly reflects the situation this election at a mayoral level, that the incumbent is not seeking re-election. But just a hypothetical question, if I can. Is it ever appropriate for a mayoral staff member in any administration to be involved in a mayoral campaign bid, whether it's the incumbent or someone else seeking re-election at any level?
No.
The key word there is involved.
From my experience, and I guess it's a parliamentary question, Councillor King. So hypothetically, the short answer is no. Of course, it's not. You're absolutely right.
And that will be monitored tightly.
It will be ruthlessly monitored.
So I suppose what I'm trying to distinguish here is what you've talked to in the past as that grey area, that might be persons or people attending meetings, debates, giving advice, and they might see it outside their day-to-day responsibilities or outside the business hours. But at any level, if it's at the weekend, if it's in the evening, is it appropriate at all for members with inside the mayoral office to be involved in another person's mayoral candidacy?
I guess there's an opportunity there just to touch on the fact that there is a separate policy for staff, which sets out those issues more clearly in terms of what's expected within your work role and what you are able to do outside your work role. And you basically have to achieve a balance between the expectations of being politically neutral on the one hand and your rights as an ordinary citizen to be politically involved outside your work hours on the other hand. And the way that is affected will depend on the position, the seniority, whether the position is an advisory position to elected members and so on. And it reflects the guidance that the State Services Commission gives to public servants.
Well, Mr Mayor, I suppose I just caution that the media in the past have taken an active interest in that, and that we just protect our
Well,
staff
I
as
can,
best
I
we
can
can.
give you my assurance, because I guess that, without prejudice, this is a general direction of the questioning. I'll be issuing a very, very clear directive to anyone who's associated with my office, as I'm sure all future mayors will do the same, that they should be very, very careful about not crossing the line. So, I thank you for raising that matter. Councillor Chris.
Well, thank you, Mr Chairman. I appreciate that on the guidance of the Auditor-General that we are adopting these principles, and it would be highly inappropriate if any resources of council are used for the purposes of re-election or election. So if I can just put my comments forward in the context of that principle. I think that when we have the election, and that's over and done with, there does need to be some further consideration on the resources that councillors need in order to be able to do their work properly. Now, I say that because for the last...
Stop, please. I don't often stand in the middle of this, but your issue, your wider issue is not appropriate here. We are discussing only...
No, there's a point that I'm actually wanting to make in terms of resources that are being used here. And if you will indulge me, you will see the relevance.
Councillor Chris, I've heard the first part of your comment, and you know that I actually tend to give you a lot of latitude in debate, because I'm waiting to hear where you're going. But I'm not waiting in this instance. We are talking only about election resource and materials.
So,
and I want you to address that. I don't want to address or talk about anything to do with post-election and resourcing of councillors.
So, at the moment, councillors who have and pay for their own phone line, they pay for their own Wi-Fi at home, and so it was linking it to that, and decisions that were taken on the basis that some of us did not want to carry two phones around, that we wanted to ensure that we had the appropriate resources, and that was done more for the convenience of constituents, particularly elderly constituents who do not want to ring a cell phone number because that is costly to them. So some of us have maintained a landline right the way through. So where that landline has been advertised in our Auckland right the way from, in my case, since 2010, and that has been advertised through council media, although I have paid for that landline, where does that now sit in terms of me advertising that is potentially an election telephone number for the purposes of communication? So you're just talking about cell phones, I'm talking about landlines and cell phones.
You're actually a good point.
Your Worship, the principle again is about the use of council resources. So that's personal landline, and there is some reimbursement for the use of a personal facility for council purposes, but I don't think that reimbursement is intended to cover the whole cost, including the personal use of it. I don't see a problem myself.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, absolutely.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to clear.
Good. There's always going to be grey areas in this. I mean, you might carry separate phones. My private phone is what I'm going to use for electioneering, and of course everyone knows the one that you use for council. So they're going to ring you on that one invariably. So you're taking phone calls in that ostensibly are going to be on election stuff, even though you are trying very hard to maintain the integrity of your private phone for electioneering. It's a tough one, isn't it? So we have to try and be quite pragmatic around this. Okay, I think everyone's had a good crack. Right, Councillor Mike.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've heard rumblings from the local boards about this, and I note some of the more thoughtful contributions from some of the local boards, and I may not have caught it, but I wonder how those concerns are to be addressed. I note the Waiheke local board can find no legislative requirement to develop an election year policy for elected members, but and they believe that the current legislative provisions are sufficient. I would have thought so, but they haven't reckoned on the Auckland Council bureaucracy, which does love to make policies about lots of stuff. However, that's fine as long as it doesn't cut across the principles and purposes of the Local Electoral Act. And I think I see in the Orake Local Board a number of points which do suggest this, which is a worry. In point X, in particular, paragraphs 13 and 14 of the policy, the words, quote, an equal opportunity to be elected, unquote, used in the summary, and that paragraphs 13 and 14 purport to refer to a principle in section 4 of the Local Electoral Act 2001. See notes relating to paras 3 and 13 in this paper, and appear to be a basis of this policy that, quote, sitting members should not have an electoral advantage, unquote, para 3. The context in which these words are used in section 4, 1b is, quote, all qualified persons have a reasonable and equal opportunity, 1, to cast an informed vote, 2, nominate one or more candidates, 3, accept nomination as a candidate, unquote. There is nothing about sitting members having an electoral advantage. This section 4 sets out principles that the Act is designed to implement, which is, quote, fair and effective representation for individuals and communities, unquote. It is stretching the point that this section implies, quote, sitting members should not have an electoral advantage. That's just nonsense, isn't it, really? Tell that to the Prime Minister or an incumbent mayor. Of course they do. I think that going back to the Orake Board, I think that the report's author and the authorisers should be asked for an explanation, and Orake Local Board members should look up the legislation too. If one of the policy foundations is incorrect, then the substance of the policy relating to that principle fails. I won't go on, Mr Mayor, but I think it was the Waitakere Local Board believed that the policy, the result of the policy would be to make incumbent serving members of this council, democratically elected, to have a disadvantage over everyone else, and in effect deprives them or constrains their civil and political rights, which I think in this case unelected staff are going too far in interfering in this process. I think there is an act and a body of law covering elections. I believe that this is prescriptive and interfering. It may be well meant, but actually in effect it's nonsense.
Your Worship.
Warwick, what do you think about that?
So the comments we made in the report, in terms of the Waiheke Local Board, there isn't a legislative requirement to adopt this policy. It's a strong requirement from the Auditor General, and it's an audit issue, not a legislative one. In terms of the Orake Local Board, we took the comments on board and made the changes.
Okay. Councillor Mike, I guess it's in the realm of right to express your view, and as Warwick has said, this is not law cast in stone, it is directive. Okay, I think we've had enough now. Right, it's been moved and seconded. Who was the seconder? Do we seconder? Would you like to second it, Councillor Linda?
I actually
You
moved
moved it? I'll second it. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against, passed. Thank you.
No, recorded.
Thank you, Catherine.